Hey guys, Todd Vandermyde here with AAP, the Asian American Perspective, to talk about things important to you. Not to be confused with AARP. These guys, Ron and Eric, are the real deal. So check it out.
Welcome to the show. Today we got Todd. Todd had a 30-year career in lobbying, representing the National Rifle Association for over 25 years as a contract lobbyist. During his career, representing motorcyclists, gun owners, gun dealers, and operating engineers. Served over 18 years in the Army, achieving the rank of a staff sergeant, having served as a radio operator in the 12th Special Forces Group, Signal Corps, a military police officer with 822nd MP Company and Cavalry Scout with E Troop 4th Cavalry and 8 Troop 4 9th, earning both airborne and Pathfinder wings. Been retired for 5 years. He's president of the Illinois' largest gun club, the Aurora Sportsman's Club, where he runs a bulldozer building out at new ranges on the club. He serves as the vice president of SADC. It's the Second Amendment Defense and Education Coalition, and the Second Amendment Law Center, working on legal issues for the Second Amendment. Thanks for coming on, Todd.
No problem, guys.
So, brought you on here, obviously, because we all live in the state, Illinois, gotta love it. You know what I mean?
I hate it.
And whenever I have my questions on gun laws, even being law enforcement, you're probably the first person I call. So, I guess what everybody's been asking me, because some of my guys knew that I was bringing you on the show, was what are the updates on this Illinois assault rifle ban? Where are we at on that?
Well, there's two tracks. Track number one is that the case is in front of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The state has filed their opening brief, and their groups, the anti-gun groups, are now starting to file their amici briefs as to why the state is right. And it'll be our turn in a couple of weeks to file our brief as to why the state's wrong. Then the state will get a rebuttal. And then sometime after that, we will get a date for oral arguments, and we'll get in front of Easterbrook, not Sykes, St. James, and another judge. And so now here's the second track. The second track is the Supreme Court. They have two cases in front of them. Snope, which is the Maryland semi-auto ban. That's been up there before. After Brewing came down, it was sitting there. It was granted, vacated, and remanded, saying see Brewing. And the Fourth Circuit got it wrong again. And so you also have a case called Ocean State Tactical, which I believe is out of either Delaware or Rhode Island, and it's on a magazine. So we keep waiting to find out what the court's going to do with these two cases. They have been relisted, I think, going on 13 times. Now, if you go back 2 years ago to Dobbs, the Dobbs case, including reschedules, was relisted 22 times. It's my opinion that we are now in the realm of Dobbs, that normally if you get relisted like 4 times and they don't take it, they normally deny your petition and away you go. We are not, but then it's like an inverse bell curve. Relisted a couple of times, good chance to get taken. Relisted in this medium number of times, like 8 or 9, bad chance it's going to get taken. Once you get to this other side of the bell curve, then it's the chances, there's a reason they're doing this. Now, some people are holding out hope for what's called a per curiam opinion. It's the court just says, hey, you got it wrong. And they issue an opinion, and who knows? It's possible. I don't know. However, there's also a lineup that there's another gun case coming up through the ranks that is being handled by the same law firm that is handling Snow. And so there's a question is, do they want to line up a bunch of stuff at the court? Clement and Murphy is the law firm. Paul Clement is the former Solicitor General. Aaron Murphy was a clerk in the Seventh Circuit here. She clerked for the Chief Judge Sykes. So they're a respected law firm. And Clement was pushed out from his old firm a couple of years ago because of the Bruin case. Some other clients, I guess, didn't like being associated with a law firm like that. So they asked him to leave. He started his own firm, and he's billing crazy dollars. So the point is that then if they take, I think ours gets pushed to the backside. Why go through the arguments in everything if they're going to take this other case, they're going to issue a decision, and that other case will be determinative of what happens with us. So it depends. That's why there's two tracks. If they don't take Snope, it's full on. We would expect the 7th with Easterbrook to rule against us. Then we're up to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what they say after that. I think our case is a better case from the standpoint you have a better record, and the ban is broader. So it makes it harder to find some wiggle room on stuff. I got to a point in my career where I didn't want to tell them every little flaw in the bill, because the more times we would go up and testify, they'd make changes and try to tweak it. And oftentimes they were half-assed changes designed to kind of maybe deal with the problem, not so much, maybe take the edge off what a challenge could be. So with that, is like give them some red meat that they're not going to fix, because let them pass the worst piece of shit that they can, because it's usually easier to knock down in court. Sure. The more broad it is, the worse it is, and so that's where it was. And that's where we are on the Illinois stuff. It's maddening that we're 2.5 years in now. We're still stuck in the same spot. It's kind of funny that what they're not doing, there's no enforcement. The only enforcement I've heard is if some gangbanger or shithead gets popped, and then they'll kind of tack something on as an additional charge, which, as you know, in Cook County is usually probably the first thing that gets tossed or thrown away. But it's not being outpoured. I live out in Kendall County. It's not being enforced. I can tell you that I've had several instances over the last year where I have been pulled over. I forgot to put a sticker on a license plate. Automatic headlights didn't come on, and it was right at sundown. Just all that kind of and I've had loaded magazines on the dash, on the ledge under your dash on the car. Sure. They haven't said squat, I mean, I had to take my truck in and get it detailed yesterday. And, the running joke is always how much ammunition and magazines and I'm going to find when I see the truck, right? And, because now you're supposed to transport a prohibited magazine unloaded and in a case as if it was that's how ridiculous this is. And, I've had guns in the truck when I've been stopped at times. They never ask. They don't, they don't say anything. At least out where we are. And, from being at the club and dealing with law enforcement at the club, we talk to a lot of LE agencies, and none of the ones that I've met out there are enforcing anything.
I know I've got some friends, because of this ban, they're hesitant to even go to the club transporting, their stuff for fear of being pulled over.
Well, that comes in a couple of different parts. One, did they register the stuff? If they registered their stuff and they're in complete compliance with the law, that's not a big issue.
Right.
If you're like a lot of people that didn't register stuff, it could be an issue if you get a cop that wants to be nosy and inquiring and whatever. And it also depends on where you live. If you live on the Cook County side of the line of things, it's, make sure all your taillights are working.
But you got,
Don't speed, don't drink and drive. Don't do things that are going to draw attention to yourself.
Right.
And that's it. We've seen a slight impact at the club, mostly on non-residents, out-of-state guys coming to shoot matches and stuff.
Right.
But we've also had the conversations with law enforcement groups that you are a guest on our ring when you're renting. If you're here to do law enforcement activities, then I'm going to tell you to go get a warrant and get off the property.
Yeah. So that, when I book those guys for the range, they all know. And here's the thing with guys pulling people over and stuff like that. At least the majority of police officers don't know anything about these guns. They don't. And the guys who do, they're not going to enforce that stuff. They don't care. You know what I mean? It's just, they're like, yeah, you got a FOID card. That means you jumped through some hoops. I know you're not a bad, especially if you have a concealed carry card. Got through a background check. You sat in a classroom for 16 freaking hours, listen to somebody like me teach concealed carry. You know what I mean? And you paid money to do so. All these gangbangers aren't doing that stuff. Those are the guys who get messed with.
Yeah, I've actually educated some cops on the side of the road about this.
Yeah, and what's funny is after that assault rifle ban, everybody was calling. It's like, hey, plus I had an FFL.
Right.
And they were like, hey, what do I do? It's like, what do you mean, what do you do? You know what I mean? Well, it says I have to register your weapon. I'm like, yeah, well,
look at what they got for registration.
Yeah, it's like, okay, then do what you got to do.
Low numbers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, seriously low numbers. And it was, they quit updating them.
Yeah, because last I saw it was like 1.8% compliance rate.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking, I think the number I saw was maybe 60,000.
Damn.
Which out of 2.4 million FOID cards.
And I should have started charging people who called me because I'm like, listen, I'm not an attorney, but you're asking me what I'm going to do. And the answer is nothing. Who's going to enforce the law? You know what I mean? They knock on your door, say, hey, do you have an assault rifle here? You don't have to answer that question. Now, unless they got a search warrant or arrest.
I actually dealt with that. So a friend of mine, he had a firearm stolen from his house from a family member. He didn't realize it was gone. It was one of those things that was under the socks in the dresser drawer.
Sure.
Right? But the kid gets picked up with the gun. They trace the gun. They come back to him. They run his FOID card for all the F-tips. They get a list of all the guns he's bought from dealers. And CPD shows up in Maywood, out of their jurisdiction with no county help, and they go knocking on the guy's door. And he's got an infant in his arms, and they start trying to bully him, and first thing he did was dial me. I'm driving to Springfield. He starts telling me what the story is. I said, you don't have to tell them, I'm not an attorney. You don't have to tell them squat. I will get an attorney on the phone for you right now if you want. And he goes, well, I got an AR in the house, and I don't want them looking around because of Cook County's ban. At the time, we didn't have a state ban. And I sat there. I said, it's up to you. Put me on the phone. You talk to the cop, sure. And they puts me on. Says, I'm so and so, and he goes, "Are you his attorney?" I said, "No, I'm the guy that's going to hire the attorney." And I said, "No, officer. The law says that if he has said that he has disposed of a firearm, he has to show you a record. He has not made the claim that he has disposed of anything, and if it's not stored at the house, he doesn't have to tell you anything. So if you don't have a warrant, well, then we'll take him down for questioning. The kid will go to DCFS for hold. I said, stop right there. I said, you have a Cook County Sheriff with you? You have a Maywood police officer with you? No. I said, you're out of your jurisdiction. My next phone call is going to be an attorney. Tell me what station you think you might be taken to so we can meet you there. And, Sullivan, I said, you do what you want. I'm going to get an attorney. Called one of the attorneys that dealt with a lot of two-way stuff and did some criminal stuff. He's like, I'm on it. And he says, I'm not far from there. So he jumped in his car and whatever and started heading that way. And so the guy called me back. I don't want to use his name. He called me back and said, hey, they're in a huddle out on the curb. And that guy's pissed. Well, they're trying to make it up in Buffalo, guys, and I don't like it. That's why there's this judge out of Texas. I don't know if you guys have seen him. He always wears these really crazy plaid jackets, and he's got these big owl ring glasses, and he's constantly doing, probable cause hearings.
Oh, yeah.
And he is tossing stuff. He goes, so what? He's standing on the curb being black? All kinds of stuff. And he's just tossing and said, no. I'd love to do an interview with that judge just because, he's the guy. And he said, and in one video, he said, we got to have a class for these officers on how to write a report. This is all subjective. There's nothing objective in any of the stuff you're giving me. It's conclusory. It's not, but, yeah, I've had an impact with some of that stuff, and I generally don't take a lot from cops.
Sure.
On the street. I sit there and, I like backing law enforcement for a lot of, they have a very difficult job. I like, they're on the front lines, and I don't begrudge them anything. But the last guy you asked for information about gun laws or firearms is
oh, I know.
If they are not a rated firearms instructor who's actually a gun guy into stuff, no. No. I outshoot most cops. I train more than most cops. I take more classes than most cops. Put way more ammo downrange.
Sure.
And I can attest to a lot of cops, the gun is just a tool. And sometimes it's a pain in the ass, and they're not interested in that end. You've seen that.
Dude, I can go on all day about that.
It's
especially newer police officers and stuff. It's not the same. You know what I mean? It's, because I do a lot of their qualifications and stuff, and it's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just get through this. You know what I mean? Let's hope you never have to use this thing. But, even some of the old timers, when I was in my first department, you qualify, because of budget once a year. And one part of the thing as I do is inspect their weapons, and they haven't cleaned their gun since the last qualification. So it's brutal. You know what I mean? So, I always find that funny. You know what I mean? But, me, I try to get as much time on the range. I try to get there as much as I can. That's what I love.
skill.
That's why I love being outside, because, I can't get anything done on an indoor range. I got to be out moving around. Got to add some stress to my training.
That's the beauty of ASC, because we let guys come out, move and shoot. We let guys set up steel. We let guys do stuff that most indoor ranges won't. Rapid fire is not an issue for us. Mag changes or whatever. You want to work on targets at 3 yards, you can work on targets at 3 yards. If you, want to do something else, we got the closest 600-yard range to Chicago, so you can shoot everything from 3 yards to 600.
Sure. So going back to this assault rifle ban, so for because I watched some of your videos, and for the guys that aren't very with the definitions and stuff, when you talk about comparing our case to Bruin and stuff like that, explain Bruin.
Okay, so in the Supreme Court history, you have Heller in 2008, which the Supreme Court finally came down and unequivocally said the Second Amendment protects an individual right to own or carry a firearm.
Sure.
Then 2 years later, you had McDonald v. the City of Chicago. Otis McDonald with the Second Amendment Foundation challenged Chicago's handgun ban. And Mayor Daley, being as stubborn as he was, thank God, ran it all the way up to the Supreme Court and lost. And that's where they sat there and said the 14th Amendment incorporates the Second Amendment. It doesn't just hold it against the federal government, it holds it against state and local governments. They are bound by it as well. Which set off a whole new firestorm of litigation. A couple of years later, there was a case out of Connecticut or Massachusetts called Catano. And this was a Second Amendment challenge to a ban because a woman was carrying a stun gun. And the Supreme Court, in a per curiam opinion, sat there and said that stun guns are protected by Second Amendment. Obviously, Benjamin Franklin was not flying a kite with a key on it to develop stun guns, okay? It was, so that is where, modern firearms, Heller said modern firearms are protected. Catano, I thought, kind of put the asterisks on it and said, yeah, look at this, but the courts have pretty much ignored Catano. Then, a couple of years ago, you had a challenge. It's New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, which was a challenge to the discretionary carry law that New York had, where it was may issue. You had to have good moral character and all that other BS. And the court doubled down on Heller and said the standard of review and the way the lower courts were going about reviewing 2A cases was wrong. They had a 2-part test, and they said it's 1 part too many. And they came up with a revised test that is text based on tradition and history. So does the text of the Second Amendment cover the conduct that's being discussed or challenged? If it does, the law is presumptively unconstitutional, and it is now the burden of the government to prove that the type of regulation or law fits with the history and tradition of the country. And most notably, that they're supposed to go back and look at 1791. Now, the anti-gunners don't like that because going back to 1791 means there wasn't a lot of stuff on the books. They keep trying to go back to 1865, 1868, right about the time that the Civil War ended and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were adopted, and said that because there were more bans of types. You keep the Bowie knife ban that gets kicked around everywhere. They threw that in our case in Southern Illinois, and the judge says, that's not what we're talking about here. That's a carry ban on knives, not guns. And so then a year ago, you had the Rahimi case come out. This is some scumbag who had beat up on his girlfriend several times, intimidated witnesses, did a whole bunch of stuff. And his public defender brought a Second Amendment challenge to 922G8 about whether somebody under that type of restraining order could be barred from owning a gun. And the court said yes, because going back to 1791, there were surety laws that said if there was a complaint and if the magistrate thought you were in danger, a magistrate would bring you in and have you post a bond that says you're going to behave. And if you don't behave and do something stupid with a firearm, you're going to forfeit the bond and who knows what else. Sure. And they said, but the thing there was a hearing. You were at least in front of the judge. It wasn't like some of the stuff they do here in Illinois where it's all done administratively, which I have a big problem with. And I think Rahimi outlaws that kind of stuff. And I think our FOIA card has a whole bunch of problems in it with Section 8 and the way they do things administratively for revocation, suspensions, all that kind of stuff. If I'm right, there's a lot of stuff that could get taken down in all the May issue states that are still being pricks about getting carry licenses out there and how they revoke stuff and do all that kind of stuff. So you had Rahimi come out and it loosened up the types of analogies. And they said you don't have to have a twin or a dead bang ringer. It doesn't, if you're banning guns in casinos, there doesn't have to be a ban on guns in casinos from 1791 or 1865. But if you can kind of make a reasonable argument that there's something very, very close, which I still think they're going to have a hard time doing, it's just getting the court to put their foot down and come down on these lower courts they haven't been thumbing their nose. They've been flipping the middle finger to the Supreme Court. And here we are 16 years later, still arguing about Heller and what it actually means. It didn't take the stuff with desegregation in the 60s this long to get through everything. Yeah, I'm a bit of a nerd on the legal side of things. I read a lot of opinions and things. I find things, part of the thing using Rahimi. I think Rahimi is a bad decision for us in a lot of ways, but when they hand you a bag full of lemons, it's like, well, let's get some vodka and make some vodka lemonades. Okay, let's make the best out of what we got. You've seen that in law enforcement. Sure, court decisions would come down and you guys had to modify your stuff. But Rahimi talked that 922G8, that part of the federal law was constitutional because they specifically cited there was a court hearing. There was a court finding. Not an administrative guy, not, some adjunct. There was an Article 3 court that sat down and said, you're a dangerous person. You can't have a gun. All right. Now, let's fast forward to a couple weeks ago. U.S. Supreme Court just said that these violent, illegal Venezuelan gang members are entitled to notice and a hearing, and they specifically said due process before they get ejected from the country. Guess what you don't get in a red flag law? Yeah. You don't get notice of a hearing before they come to scoop up your guns. Guess what you don't get in a clear and present danger situation where the cops file something against you with the state police? They revoke your FOID card, and then it's like, appeal it and tell it to the judge. And all that, and that's where it's like, hey, wait a minute. How does a criminal, illegal, alien gang member get more rights than a citizen in this country? That's those are the things that I do, that I look at when the Supreme Court says there was a case that came out right before Rahimi called Jarksy. Here's a guy charged by the Security and Exchange Commission for violations. Wasn't facing jail time. He was facing a $250,000 penalty. He took his case to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled he is entitled to a jury trial on the fine. Not an administrative court run by the same agency that found fault. So you had the SEC was the investigating agency as well as the trier of fact. And now they're going to be the guys that issue the penalty. And the court said can't do that. So here, it's like, so if this guy is entitled to a jury trial where he can present evidence, he can present witnesses, he can challenge evidence, he can have his lawyers there. We get none of that it's all wait till, you're a year down the road with this bullshit FOID review board, and then come back and see what there is, and then you can go to court. It's like, no, it isn't that we're guilty and we have to prove we're innocent, and it's the other way around. And it gets lost on everybody. And I've testified about this in front of some committees at the state capitol a couple of times. I do it just to kind of let them know, hey, I'm still out here, and just to screw with them because they don't pay attention to all the nuances and details. But so that's all the kind of stuff that's going on.
So you're still litigating? You're still going to Springfield, still doing all that stuff still, or less of that now?
I don't go to Springfield anymore.
Okay.
I've been able to testify remotely.
Okay.
One of the good things about COVID. But I am involved in litigation. I'm a consultant to a law firm that I push I look at cases or I look at issues that I said, hey, I think this is something we should look at. I
Right.
think that here's something we should tackle
Right.
and stuff like that. A case in point, so when you look at the Illinois case, it's actually 4 cases right now. There's the Barnett case brought by NSSF and NRA, which is the lead case. Then you've got the Second Amendment Foundation case. Then you've got a local lawyer who brought a case. Then you have the FFL case. I'm involved in the FFL case. And in that case, I knew everybody else was going to go after guns and magazines. But there are a lot of nuances to this law. And part of it is it bans parts. You can't have the parts to assemble a gun that's on the list. So, and then there was a registration component.
Right.
And I looked at it and I said, wait a minute. So there's a concept that you might have heard that the farmers have been fighting out, that bikers have been fighting about, called right to repair, where you have the right to repair things that you own, cars, farm machinery, because a lot of the manufacturers are making it to where you can only get dealer service because of the computer programs and everything else.
Right.
So I kind of took that to a different level and said, hey, if with this parts ban, so this is where a lot of, Todd's math, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. How do we get there, right? Not this newfangled math of, well, you tried hard. So if you go back to Rhonda Azell, shout out to my girl there, in the Azell case that was brought in a challenge to Chicago's ban on ranges, it said that Chicago at the time had their own firearms permit on top of the FOID card when they had lost the McDonald case,
Okay.
and we ended up beating them back on that. I had 4 different cases that I was involved in against the city of Chicago with helping other people. And so with that, Azell says that you have the right to train and maintain proficiency. So if I have the right to train and maintain proficiency, then don't I have the right to keep my firearm in good, safe working order?
Right.
If I have the right to maintain my firearm in good, safe working order, you cannot ban the parts to allow, otherwise, guns are mechanical objects. Sooner or later, I blew up an AR because a round of 300 blackout got mixed up in a MAGA 5.56.
Hmm.
All right. I mean, based on this, if I can't get parts, that firearm is dead. It's gone.
Sure.
I can't rebuild it. I can't do anything. And so, in my theory, we've begun to win the right to repair. And this branches into bigger things if you play a 3 or 4 dimensional chess game. So let's look at right to repair. So I have the right to keep my firearm in good working order. So it's safe for me, so I can train, I can do the things that I'm allowed to do that the court says.
Right.
Well, next, if I can assemble all the parts, acquire all the parts, do I not have the right to build my own firearm? I mean, all the parts are laying here. I have the skill to assemble a firearm.
Right.
And then jumping off from there, if I have the right to build my own firearm, then do I not have the right to manufacture my own firearm? Not for I'm going to resell these things as a commercial entity. That's a different issue. But does Todd have the ability to if I have a machine shop, if I have a lathe or whatever, do I have the ability to manufacture my own firearm for my own personal use? If the answer is yes, then the ghost gun laws are largely going to die on the vine.
Now, is that manufacturing your own firearm or firearm parts?
Either.
Okay.
And, I mean, if you're doing it for your own use and not for commercial purposes, I would agree that there can be some licensing of commercial entities who are doing things who are manufacturing firearms for retail or wholesale or things like that. But in 1791, the original Springfield Armory, owned by the government, didn't start making muskets around then. Didn't start making muskets till 1791, long after the Revolutionary War. In the beginning, most of our guns were being brought, they were either being imported or they're being made by small companies and small blacksmiths. And so you've heard the term lock, stock, and barrel.
Right.
Well, that comes from guys used to specialize. Blacksmiths used to specialize in making barrels and hammer forging out barrels.
Right.
Stock makers would sit there, sort of, the Kentucky long rifle with their very pronounced stocks.
Right.
And then you would have guys that made the lock, the flintlock assembly for the gun.
Right.
That's where the term comes from. You'd get the lock, the stock, and the barrel, and you'd put it all together. And that was far more prevalent at the time the Constitution was signed. So going back to Bruin with text, so does the text keep bear? Yeah. Acquire. We've already had a federal court in Illinois say that acquisition is protected under the Constitution, because if there's no way to acquire a firearm, how does one get one if not manufacture one?
Right.
So the point being that, yeah, I think that if we go down this road and ultimately win this, then I think their ghost gun stuff is on the ropes, because they can't stop you as an individual from manufacturing your own firearm. Now, whether or not the ATF, they won the Vanderstock case and how much they can regulate, but part of the problem there was they were selling kits that had, the buy, build, shoot was they had everything in there: slide, barrel, springs, trigger assembly. They had a polymer frame, and you had to drill 3 holes. Now, I agree, it's either a firearm or it's not. But what we're probably going to eventually see out of the court is something like pornography. Well, I know pornography when I see it.
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, try to write a definition.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So, with that, I mean, if I saw Chuck Schumer naked, that's pornography all the way. Just. But
I don't know what you'd call that.
yeah. So, there's a lot of things like that, that's what I've been doing legally. And I would also point out that our case, we challenged the registration scheme, and the judge went along with us. We were the first case that I know of in the country that won on registration at the district court level. So those are the things that I've been doing litigation wise. I've got this whole thing about Rahimi and the VA that
Right.
I've been trying to push around as to, how I think that we can use Rahimi to undo what the VA was doing with vets, and then use that, like I said earlier, against administrative processes that revoke your right to own a firearm or whatever. I think that's the 3-dimensional game we need to be playing here. A lot of guys, and they seem to throw lawsuits out there that are great for making a press release statement, but none of it's truly foundational, in my mind, in playing a 3-dimensional game against the other side. The other side is getting, from when I lobbied, they were idiots about what they wrote. Now, they're still stupid about guns.
Right.
But they are hiring some very sharp lawyers to kind of take some of the rough edges off of that stuff in the way they are phrasing things and the things they are going after. They're getting shrewd, they're getting smart about how to make it almost impossible to contest and give the government the entire upper hand in saying you're a bad individual. And that's what's going on. I ought to start pointing at him so you don't get a complex.
Yeah, been pointed at a lot. So who's like leading the charge on all these cases and stuff like that? I mean, is the NRA funding this? Is the Illinois State Rifle Association funding this? I know a lot of money comes in through donations and stuff to fund these legal issues and stuff, but
It's a mixed bag. NRA, for all the troubles that they've gone through, kind of sidestepped a lot of stuff. Now, when our case came on 2 years ago, I think they knew they had to step in, or they were going to have a very big problem. They were in the middle of all the Wayne LaPierre stuff.
Sure.
With that. Fortunately, the the reform crew just won the NRA elections. I ran for the board. I didn't make it. I was about 1,200 votes short.
You're crazy.
But NRA 2.0 is involved in a big fight on Capitol Hill right now, trying to get suppressors and short-barreled rifles taken out of the NFA. So NRA, so most people don't know this, there was a case of NRA v. Chicago and Oak Park at the same time McDonald went up because the NRA filed a day later. McDonald became the lead case because it was first. The NRA got more money in attorney's fees than the other groups did. We got $1.2, $1.3 million. Oak Park and Chicago had to write checks of over $650,000 each to the NRA. And I saw pictures of of the checks. And then you've got SAF has been out. SAF are the ones that kicked off Heller. They kicked off McDonald. They in the Illinois Kerry case, SAF's case was Moore v. Madigan. Ours was Shepard v. Madigan. And again, we did quite well. NRA was right there in that one. NRA supported Sean Gowder in his case. David Lawson, who was one of the original McDonald plaintiffs, when he had a second go with the city of Chicago, NRA through me supported him. So NRA is involved in a lot of stuff. SAF has made their name when, nature abhors a vacuum. And when NRA, through all the LaPierre stuff, got sidetracked, SAF stepped in.
What's SAF?
Second Amendment Foundation.
Okay.
Then you had FPC, the Firearms Policy Coalition, show up, and they started throwing lawsuits all over the place. And then Gun Owners of America figured out that there was something to be had here. And Gun Owners of America started filing lawsuits and joining lawsuits. They're in on our FFL case in Southern Illinois. GOA joined on that one. So, you've got those guys. ISRA has been working hand in hand with SAF for the most part. And then you've got groups like the California State Rifle and Pistol Association, Maryland Shall Issue, Virginia Self-Defense League. The thing is, you don't see a lot of stuff coming out of Texas and whatever as far as groups, because those good states are in good court districts and they're not going to pass anything bad. So we're stuck with the bullshit coming out of Washington and California and then Hawaii in the Ninth Circuit. You've got Illinois as the poster boy in the Seventh Circuit, and then a lot of the stuff on the East Coast is just bad. But there's a bunch of different groups that are heading this up, and that's why at ASC we started the Second Amendment Defense and Education Coalition, SADC, and my buddy Eric Callis runs it. I'm on the board for it, and we support litigation, focusing here in Illinois, but we try to fund and help things. We filed several amici briefs in other cases around the country to lend, a hand to things. Then you've got the Second Amendment Law Center, which I'm also on the board of out in California. And that's where I come in, I think, having been on the ground as a lobbyist, seeing how agencies work close hand and how they try to do stupid shit. And my experience there, and I'm not a lawyer. I read a lot of court opinions and I see things that evidently some guys don't see. And so because of that, my perspective, there was one of the cases was when one of the challenges to Cook County went up. NRA had kind of taken over the case, and I came up with a theory about preemption under the Wildlife Code. And working with some guys, they wrote an amici brief under that theory. I got to edit the brief. And then they filed it. The first question in the oral arguments at the Supreme Court of Illinois was, isn't this all foreclosed upon by the preemption in the Wildlife Code? And the lawyer on our side, Your Honor, if you want to rule that way, we'll take it.
Right.
They didn't rule that way,
Right.
But it's kind of neat that when you come up with a theory and it's the first question out of the box, that they're reading it, they're paying
Sure.
attention to it. So I see things differently, and I look at it differently and all that. And that's one of the reasons that, I guess it's interesting to see where their policy actually meets real life. You saw this in law enforcement.
Yeah.
They can say X, this is how it actually works out on the street. I just had that testifying on a bill where this guy from GPAC, who's a lawyer and former assistant U.S. attorney, sat there and said, "Oh, this isn't going to impact anything." I said, "Wait a minute, I'm the president of the largest gun club in Illinois. We've seen a 30% decline in some of our matches from out-of-state competitors because all we use in these matches are ARs, AKs, and the like. What do you mean? Have you never been to a 3-gun match?"
Right.
And they're just, he didn't say anything. It's just like, you need to get out more. But that's your typical anti-gunner, your legislator. They know very little about guns. They know very little.
Right.
And so that's where part of the problem comes from. But we're just going to have to keep beating them in court. It's annoying. You would think that 16 years later, we shouldn't have to be fighting this hard, but they want that much control.
Well, it's a good thing you're still in the fight. But kind of go off topic. You're president of ASC.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of presidents of a lot of companies don't get their hands dirty like you do for ASC.
Literally.
I mean, literally. I mean, when you become president, a lot of people just like to.
Have you ever tried
Delegate.
calling them during the day?
No.
You got the bulldozer
What you're
going on
doing,
in
yeah.
the background. I was like, fuck, dude, just call me when you're done.
Yeah, so the good news is I got a set of headphones with a mic with a Bluetooth that Bluetooths to my phone. So yeah, you're usually interrupting my Kenny Chesney or AC/DC when you call or whatever. But yeah, I was an operating engineer. I'm a heavy equipment operator by trade, lobbyist by accident, consultant even more so. Several years ago, 7 years ago, the club was starting an expansion with trying to do some construction. I saw what we were getting charged by contractors, and I said, you know what? If we got our own equipment, there's a few other guys like me, we can do this for way cheaper. So we bought our own equipment, bulldozer, track loader, excavator. Now we've got a dump truck, a road grader, a compactor, skid steer and everything, and we do our own construction. And yeah, I get dirty doing it.
Yeah, you do, and I've probably been a member now for at least 10 years. I can't even remember honestly, but from day one to now, I think the club has improved dramatically. I mean, from just flooded out fields to
When was the
Nice.
last time you were out there?
before the fall. In the fall,
Okay, so we just dropped over $50,000 in concrete on the rifle pistol ranges
wow,
to make the firing lines nicer. So wherever where the new covers went up 2 years ago, we now put down the concrete
right,
to make the firing lines a lot nicer. We have built. We're one of the. I would probably say there's probably less than 5 ranges in the country that have a full-on live fire shoot house.
right. It's fantastic.
Ron was very instrumental when he was a member of the board and us pushing that through and getting it done. And part of it is we want to be able to offer training to members and have match experiences that you can't get elsewhere.
Right.
And then on the other side of it is we want to be able to have instructors come out to give our members access to training that is usually hard to come by.
Right.
And so it's often, CQB is a big thing. If you didn't do it in the military and learn some of that stuff, it's hard to find a civilian course that lets you come in and do CQB.
Right.
We've had former Delta guys like John Shrek Maffei come out and teach at the club. He's hopefully coming back out this fall.
Great.
Hey, Shrek, give me a call.
Great.
We've got Ben Wallach from Vanilla Gorilla. He's a former SEAL team guy. He comes out and he teaches that kind of. So we want to have those opportunities at the club that are very hard to come. You won't see this type of classes or training offered at most other gun clubs or ranges around. Now I know that up north in McHenry, there's a shoot house. I've walked through it and whatever. But,
D5.
yeah, I know who it is.
Yeah.
I just wasn't mentioning.
Yeah, I know.
I've
Okay,
been.
is that an indoor?
Yeah.
Okay, so they
Yeah,
got a
it is.
shoot house in that facility as well?
Yep, they do.
Okay.
They do. And we couldn't do an indoor one because the HVAC requirements would be through the roof. You would probably be, when Gap redid their stuff 10 plus years ago, I think they spent somewhere on the order of $2 million on their HVAC.
Crazy.
So, you're talking, we'd probably have at least $1 million in the HVAC and everything. And then the whole project just gets way more. I mean,
Right.
as it is, COVID bit us in the ass because the cost of the project almost doubled simply because of the steel prices and everything that was going on. But we have that. We have a vehicle bay where guys can, where classes can come in and train.
Right.
And you've got almost a 360 shooting environment. You don't have to worry about up range down, and we've got it designed that if an LE group wanted to come out and train and you wanted to set up a blind scenario where they had to pull in and then deal with what's in front of them, you can do that.
Right.
We've got that. We have a dedicated bullseye range. We're in the middle of putting 9 new ranges on the east side with a 200 and an elevated shooting platform. We've got on the west side, we've got 16 ranges, including a 600 that now has an elevated shooting platform on it.
Wow.
So, and then we've got a sporting clays course, the shotgun stuff. We've got 5-stand skeet, trap, wobble trap, teals. So
Fishing.
yeah, there's fishing
Yeah.
out at the club, and we've got a new fishing chairman who's really going gangbusters on bringing the health of the ponds up, stocking the ponds, doing some stuff. There have been some nice crappie and bass getting pulled out of there recently. So
Yeah, because I joined the club right around when you did. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then I eventually got on the board, but previous to Eric Callis. And
Right.
that board compared to where we are now, I mean, it
9 day.
it was night and day when Eric joined, and then
Yeah.
even more so now. I mean, it's been an accelerated path up
Yeah.
until, I resigned my position on the board. It's just, man, there's always things going on,
Right.
always new build. I mean, since I've been on the board with 3 buildings, the
Yep.
shoot house, you know what I mean? Just the shotgun sports, you know what I mean? And then where are we at on the pavilion? I mean, that's got to be.
it's up.
Yeah, see
It's
what I
up
mean?
with concrete. They want to make it bigger.
Yeah.
They
so-
want an outdoor kitchen.
Oh.
Shotgun guys are kind of like Goldwing guys.
Yeah.
So Harley.
That's a good analogy.
No,
You are correct.
Remember, Harley live to ride, ride to live. Goldwing guys are ride to eat, eat to
Yeah.
ride. And the shotgun guys are very much the same way. They are all about their food, and our pig roast that they put on is phenomenal. Not knocking it, but yeah, those guys, they want more, and good. And we
Right.
do special events. Companies come out and host events with us and all that kind of stuff. And so, the club is going in a really good
Oh
direction.
no, yeah, it's come a long ways. I remember the days of, putting the waivers in the privy, and then taking a piss at the same time.
We've come along, and we now have 3 buildings with running water and flush
Yeah,
toilets.
yeah.
Oh, I
I
know.
mean,
Yeah, because Lisa we'd have to stop at Casey's before we
Yeah.
go use the bathroom because she wasn't going on those porta potties
Yeah.
and stuff or the privy and stuff. So
So we keep making improvements to it and stuff like that, and it's a good time. Yeah, if you usually see a piece of yellow iron moving, I'm probably
Right.
on it
Yeah,
or
yeah.
around it.
Yeah.
But it's my therapy. It is. I enjoy doing that kind of stuff, and long after I'm gone, at least somebody will say, "Yeah, I remember the guy that." built
Yeah, I mean,
that."
like I
and
said,
then that's the thing. It's going to give our kids and the next generations coming up behind us, they'll have a place to go.
Yeah, like I said, not many presidents are hands-on, but you definitely are. So
it's funny you say that. Know who you are because we got a new kid at work and we were talking about Second Amendment stuff, and he's like, "Oh man, I watch this YouTube channel, man. Freedom Steel.
Yep.
Guy named Todd. It's funny you say that.
You want to talk to him?
Yeah. Let me call him up for you. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I know you're laying down quite the legacy and stuff. Going back to that. So, in your opinion, like being optimistic and stuff like that, where do you see the assault rifle ban going? I mean, how soon do we get a fix for that? I mean, with the current administration coming in there and stuff, you got Trump. I mean, there's a whole plethora of questions I got. You know what I mean? Like
I think
constitutional carry, stuff like I know it'll be a while before Illinois gets on board with that, but the main thing I'm looking at is the assault rifle ban. I mean, what is your optimistic view on where we're at?
13 months.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because that's the optimistic view. That's if they take Snope and rule in our favor. Because
Nice.
if they take Snope, they could set it for argument October, November. But I would wager that they would probably, just like Dobbs, they would hold off till the end of the term, the end of June to release that decision. I would love it because, they're going to be releasing opinions tomorrow. And they still have the Smith & Wesson case where Mexico is trying to sue the manufacturers. They heard the oral arguments. We're waiting for the decision.
Nice.
So, I would hope it comes out tomorrow because I think it will shut down a bunch of other garbage that's out there, depending on how it's written. But you've got that. If they take Snope, we win June of next year.
Nice.
If they don't take Snope, which I don't think is happening, if they don't take Snope, then how fast can we get through the Seventh Circuit and how fast can we get up to the Supremes? Because I would not put it back. I call Judge Easterbrook, the guy that's now in charge of this case, frivolous Frank. And that's because in the Supreme Court, in Heller, they said some have made the argument bordering on the frivolous that only those firearms in existence at the time of the founding are protected. We do not view constitutional rights that way. It's on page 8 of the decision. And when Easterbrook wrote the Freedman case, a challenge I was involved in against the Highland Park gun ban, he said that because these guns were not around at 1791, they weren't protected, completely contravening what the Supreme Court wrote. My thing is that the only thing bigger than Easterbrook's waistline is his frickin' ego, and they need the double doors on the courtroom for him to get in.
Yeah.
Because he's all pissed off that he thinks he was smarter than Scalia and smarter than Thomas and smarter than Alito, and he should have been up there and never got up there, never got the call. And he's been he's one of those conservatives that is conservative over here on this, but on a bunch of other stuff, it's just like, no way. And he doesn't. The only gun ruling, I think, when he was on the panel for McDonald, and I was in the courtroom, and he looked down at Steve Holbrook and said, "Counselor, we all know this isn't the last stop for a while, so why don't you just stop your argument and save your time?" I mean, that's how arrogant the prick is. And so the only thing I agreed with Easterbrook on is after our side won McDonald, the city said since they repealed their handgun ban and there wasn't a real final order that we weren't entitled to attorney's fees. And he wrote an opinion that said, wait a minute, they went to the Supreme Court, got a judgment that the handgun ban was unconstitutional, essentially got everything they asked for, and you said they're not prevailing parties? I mean, it was even too ridiculous for Frank Easterbrook. But yeah, because of the Freedman decision and his continued reliance on that in the Beavis decision, I call him frivolous Frank. But if, because Duncan is the magazine case that's next teed up. They got a final decision out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So the way this whole process works, you start at the district court, go to the Court of Appeals, then if there's an en banc, appeal, that means in most courts, you get a 3-judge panel for the appeal. The en banc is everybody in the court, all the appellate judges sit for this review. California's district is so big, they've got like 55 judges. So they get like a 15-judge panel It's time to, under Trump, and if the Republicans can keep their head out of their ass, they ought to break the Ninth Circuit up into 2 different districts. But so then you get en banc, and then from there you get the Supreme Court. Well, Duncan, the California magazine case that's been kicking around for over 10 years, has been to the Supreme Court twice previously, was issued a final decision by an en banc panel contrary to us. So the California State Rifle and Pistol Association is appealing that to the Supreme Court and going to file cert. I would think that they could be ready for a cert petition within the next 2 weeks. And if it gets up there, maybe it bumps Ocean State Tactical because it's a final decision. Ocean State Tactical is on interlocutory appeal because they did not get the injunction they want, and the Supreme Court doesn't generally like it. So it's kind of interesting why they're keeping that case around. But magazines is fairly closely tied with semi-autos, from as you guys know. So we'll wait and see if they're just waiting for Duncan to get there. Duncan's been briefed before.
Sure.
So they don't need all the briefings to get everything, other than what the lower courts have been fucking up for the last 2 years.
Yeah,
So-
I can't imagine what new information from either side that could be presented. in
There
court.
isn't. The only thing that's going to be new, I would wager, is that if they take Snope, I would wager that because of what DOJ has just done on FRTs and what the court did on pump stocks, that they are going to try to say that these things are all just semi-autos or machine guns. That there's no difference between the two anymore. But in Vanderstock, at oral arguments, the ATF or the DOJ, they said this was under Biden. They said that, they would never consider an AR-15 frame to be readily convertible like, like, like they were considering FRTs and bump stocks to make them full auto, that, they just because you have to drill the third hole, they would not consider it readily convertible, which is the key language in the NFA. So it's the Supreme Court precedent cuts against them. Gorsuch even mentioned
Yeah,
that.
I just saw that article about the forced reset triggers and
Yep.
stuff last week.
Yep.
Yahoo put it out of all people.
Yeah,
You know what
it's
I mean?
it's an interesting result to that case. But some people are complaining that Trump's not doing enough. I would say, if you've never worked around government to see, obviously it always seems like when it's working against you, it works at the speed of light. And when you want it to work in your favor, it is slow and grinds and grinds and grinds. But look, you have a Department of Justice that has rethinking their position on suppressors in the Fifth Circuit. They're rethinking their position on Vanderstock. They've asked for a stay on that for another 30 days. They have reversed themselves on FRTs. They have settled that case. They are rethinking their position on nonviolent felons and their possession of firearms. You now have the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice looking at investigating states and localities for their infringements on the 2A. To me, that was on my wish list. I wanted to do a video on my wish list for the Trump administration and treating states like California, Illinois, New York the way they treated the southern states after the Civil Rights Act passed and the desegregation, all the bullshit they played. I'm all about it. I mean, I think we are getting, and if we win this thing with Congress with suppressors, Trump said he'll sign it. I think that there's a ton of things that we are making headway on, and we're just 125 days.
Sure.
We haven't even hit, the 1 year mark on everything. And yeah, it's maddening. Our case is 2.5 years. Why should it take 2.5? Why should it take California 10 years on Duncan? Why should it take that long to get your rights fixed or
Right.
protected or recognized? And God knows we all know that. But
I'm very happy. I mean, there's a few more things they could do, but I'm not throwing rocks. And I know some people were critical of Attorney General Bondi when her selection came up. Look, when she was the AG of Florida, she did what she thought as a Republican after a massive shooting down there. That, and it's not an excuse, but I understand where they were coming from, and you have to understand the playing field. And she was yes, to other powers that be. Now she works under Trump, and it looks like she's doing the same. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Trump says, and his
Right.
inner circle says, go this route. Then that's what I mean. You're not hearing them come down. I mean, they made and I think part of the problem here is that the attorney general, she's still drinking from a fire hose trying to figure out everything that's going on across the country, right? So did she know that some assistant U.S. attorney down in Texas was going to file a brief saying X on suppressors? No. Did she know that a brief was going to be filed over here on this? Probably not. I mean, how many cases does the Department of Justice have, whether it be civilly or criminally? Or so, what I think is going on here is that I think they're getting their hands around stuff. And if it was me because the internet blew up about the suppressor case down in Texas. And, if I was the attorney general or the chief of staff, I would have said, all right, memo goes out to all ASAs. If you've got a gun case, we want to know about it. Whether it's criminal or civil, we want to know about it. And we want to, now we can take all the dirt bags that are doing illegal stuff with guns, they can go over in this pile. And all the civil cases like Texas and challenges to 922G or whatever, they go over in this pile. And then all the other stuff that's kind of, those guys that got jammed up over key cards down in Florida is a bullshit deal. Okay, you're telling me that an etched piece of metal the size of a credit card is the same thing as a Glock switch to make something full auto? I mean, let's be serious here. I mean, they ought to be pardoned, and they ought to go after how ATF. But they've been cleaning house at ATF. They've fired several people that were knee deep in the Biden gun control stuff. They're gone. Mr. Trump, if you want a permanent director of the ATF, I'll move to Virginia. I'll get a condo. I'm available, or I'll live out of my motorhome. I don't know.
You got to bring a bulldozer, though.
Yeah, well, I'll just go over to Quantico and see what I can borrow from the Marines. They got John Deere bulldozers.
Yeah.
But no, that's there's a ton of stuff going on. I'm happy with 125 days. I'm happy. I'm not. I'm surprised more often than not that
Right.
they're doing. And they're already investigating the L.A. Sheriff's Department or L.A. Police Department, one of the two, or the Sheriff's Department, about their concealed carry. It's a 2-year wait to get an appointment.
Jesus Christ, man. I can't imagine being a civilian in one of those states.
Part of it is it's like us in the FOID card. If this is what you grew up under, you kind of, you get, it's that Pavlov's dog. You're kind of accustomed to certain things. You keep saying, well, we're not New Jersey, we're not but we're getting closer and closer. And, the only thing that these guys are going to understand is to beat the ever-living dog snot out of them in court to where, I'm hoping that next session, I mean, we're in the last 2 weeks of session in Springfield. I'm hoping that next year I get to go back and say, hi, remember me? I told you so. Now you can either start listening. I actually say, it's like, hey guys, I ought to charge you guys continuing legal education credits for what I'm throwing down here because I'm winning more than you are.
That's hilarious. Well, I'm glad you came on our show. So, the obviously our podcast called The Asian American Perspective, and
Well, it's all been my perspective
Well,
tonight.
I-
What's your perspective?
what's hilarious is, this kind of shows, for the people who don't know Todd, he probably has more Asian friends or more Filipino friends than Eric and myself put
Combined,
together.
correct.
He shows up to my house without even looking. I hear him taking his shoes off, getting into my house. I was like, well, there's somebody who knows a ton of freaking Filipinos right there. automatically taking his goddamn shoes off at my house and stuff.
Well, I didn't want your wife throwing a sandal at me
Yeah,
or
there you go.
something, you know?
Who is not Filipino, by the way.
Which is right.
Yeah, so, anyways, listen. So, thanks again for coming out here, man. You know, I've learned a lot about the Second Amendment fight we got going on. You know, Eric and I were talking about, who we're bringing on the show, and you're like at the top of the list. You know, Eric
thank
was
you.
like, got to have Todd on here. So, guys out there, when you're done clicking on our videos, check out Freedom Steel on YouTube and stuff like that, and get a lot of the legal updates. I'm on his channel all the time. Not saying I understand everything that's going on this channel and stuff. It's above my.
I try to break it down and make it easy to
you know,
digest.
my GED level of education, stuff like that. So,
Hey, dude, I've got nothing more than a high school diploma. I don't have anything else. I
So-
mean, that's it. The thing is that when I was arguing in front, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a bulldozer operator by trade. I just knew that I was going to be going up against lawyers and prosecutors and cops in the committees. So I had to be smarter than they were. So I took the time to read the court opinions, to figure stuff out, and I sought out people, said, look, I'm trying to understand this concept of constructive possession. And there were guys that would sit there and we'd hash out, say, yep, you've got it. Okay, well, then it applies like this. Yes. Okay, so, those were the things I did because I had to go up against these guys. One guy was a former judge, and, but it's about, taking the time to learn. It's not difficult. It's a lot of reading and it's a lot of nuance. And there's a couple of things that I've picked up from some Supreme Court decisions that, I just got to do more on my channel with my wife's situation and everything. It's sometimes hard, and I go out to the club and I run a bulldozer and it's therapy. I
Right.
mean, have you ever seen a D8 parked in front of a therapist's office? See, I'm telling you guys. So,
Right.
life gets in the way of some things. I got to get back to the channel. I got a ton of updates and a ton of things. You guys have asked me about some stuff to do. That's just, that's where it is. But I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed talking to the guys. I mean, you guys know, you get out to the club, you get stopped and asked 100 questions about
right.
stuff and everything. And for the guys out there, if you're interested, you can check out Aurora Sportsman's Club. It's aurorasc.org. We do have memberships open that you can put the application in online and sign up to see if you want to be a member. And then we also have Second Amendment Defense and Education Committee. If you want to make a contribution to the Illinois fight and litigation, you can go there. Just look up SADC. Lots of things. I don't know why guys say if I retire, I don't know what I do with myself. I have no problem filling the day.
Yeah, right.
I have no problem.
Well, thanks again, Todd. I appreciate you coming here. Eric and I ecstatic that you decided to come and check out our show.
My
and stuff.
pleasure. Happy to do it.
So, thanks, guys.
Right.
And signing out, and check out Freedom Steel, and look up Todd. He's got your answers. Thanks, guys.
Frag out.